Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. It's wonderful to see so many folks here today. We also know that for some people it may be late in the day, it might be early, so we give everybody a few more minutes to jump on and come in and join us today. But we're so glad everybody's here, which is part of the wonderful, our part about being with the coalition is how many people we get to spend time with. So while we're waiting for other folks to jump on, if you can, please introduce yourself in the chat box. Say hi to everybody. Folks, your name, where you're coming from. If you're connected with an institution or a site or a piece of history, let us know all of it. And start saying hi. As always, we hope you leave with some new skills. We hope you leave with some new information, but more than anything else, we hope you leave with some new friends and colleagues to do. And so we got a bunch of folks jumping on, so we're going to kind of let the flood come. So good to see so many members and friends on the call already. Thanks to everybody who's already dropping names and connections in the chat box. Look at the group of people we have here today. Between all of us, I think we got some ideas. I think we've got some answers. I think we've got some ways forward between this whole group of people. All right. And again, appreciate everybody's promptness. And we're going to give folks just one more minute as we get going. Plenty of time to write your own introduction and kind of scroll through the introductions. See who else is thinking about similar questions to you. See who else is thinking about ideas along with you too. All right. I love this. Also gives us the opportunity. I feel like we get a national and international weather report looking at the amount of sunniness and things behind people. Where are there storms? Where do we have good weather? All right. There's still a lot of folks filtering in from the internet, so thanks for your patience for just one more second while we let everybody kind of come in and get settled and find a place. For people who are just joining us now, folks are introducing themselves in the chat box, so please go ahead and do that. Jump in, say hi. If you see some friends in there who you haven't seen for a while, go ahead and say hello to them. If you see somebody at a site that you've never gotten to visit, but you've always wanted to go to, this is your moment. Go ahead, be friendly, introduce yourself, make that connection. We've got some amazing places, some that I've been lucky enough to get to, and a number that I still haven't, but it's on the list. Hope everybody who's coming in on the Gulf Coast there is safe today. Yeah. All right. I think we'll get rolling with just some introductions right now. And then, because we're gonna do introductions in a few ways. Just to say really quickly that my name's Braden. I'm with the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. I'm our Director of Methodology and Practice. I've got a couple of my wonderful colleagues on the call with us today. Linda Norris, Director of Global Programs, and Camilla from our communications team, who helps with so many of our pieces and the things that members see. So they're here as well. They'll be in the chat. They'll be around in some of the small groups. So if you have questions throughout, find one of us in the chat in one of the small groups, and we will always talk about any number of pieces as they come up. just wanted, as we get started, a few things about the digital space that we're in. So we're using Zoom, right? The moment where you're on the airplane and they're like, hey, we're going to teach you to use a seatbelt, right? So many of you have probably been on this platform before, but we just want to level set real quick. So a couple things that matter here, right, are about, for us, about being able to communicate with lots of people. That's being able to hear voices, being able to listen. So that means where possible, turning off your microphone so that we can hear lots of people. Where possible, turning on your video so we can make human connections around the world and see the kinds of reactions and impacts and make all the kind of small change and exchange of human interaction where possible. I've been known to do some stretching on some staff calls, so I get the desire to turn off the video. But also, please use the chat box throughout, right? People are already using it. Start conversations. Find people who are working on the same things as you. Find people you want to connect with. Share links to stuff. Share links to challenges, to solutions, to opportunities. Please ask questions in there. Throw material in. So use the chat box. Use the chat box throughout. And also, where possible, if you can, in the top right-hand corner of Zoom, you get the option to look at a speaker view or look at a gallery view. We encourage you to use gallery view to see as many folks as possible. We are also going to be moving back and forth between me saying a few things and showing some slides. We're going to do some conversation. We're going to do some small groups. Throughout all of that, as we engage, we'd encourage everybody to engage with each other with care, with compassion, and for a sense that there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom and experience on this call, and we want to be able to hear from everybody. So we're going to make space for everybody. Good. Can we do that? Care, compassion, and ability to make space. I see a lot of thumbs up, and then I see some of our friends making faces because they're being silly. Lauren. But it's great. Good. I'm glad we'll hold that in mind as we jump into this today. And I also just want to start out that a couple of us were already talking this morning as we were waking up. And as we're going to dive into some specifics that you all are thinking about today. But it's been a couple of days where we've been hearing from so many of our members around the world who are fighting oppression, who are fighting totalitarianism, who are fighting racism, fighting colonialism, whether that's in Chile or Belarus or South Sudan or Ukraine or the United States. And so we just wanted to take a moment at the start of this and to think about some of the larger work that the coalition and members are involved in, and just to say we're standing with all of those who are fighting every day. We're standing with all those who are hurting every day. And we hope that our members, we hope that the general public, we hope that the friends who are on this call are able to find ways to become involved and engaged in the processes of transformation that we need locally, nationally, and globally. You know, and I live in the US, so the US is very much on my mind. But we hope that people are able, as we do this work and as you engage with the coalition today and in other days, we're able to think about the ways that we can use history as a support and a guide to people involved in those processes of awareness building, building understanding, and again, supporting the transformation that communities are working on around the world. And so that's on all our minds, and our hearts are with folks. We want to actually start today. There's a lot to talk about. We're not going to get through solving all of the world's problems, but we're going to start on a few of those pieces. And we want to start, there was such a powerful response from people to our one question survey. Everybody's here because something's on your mind. I don't think a lot of people were coming to the webinar saying, hey, everything's peachy and I think it's all going to be hunky-dory going forward, right? You come to a webinar like this because there's something that you're thinking about. And so as I said a little earlier, right, the coalition, we find that there are three critical things to help make change in the world, right? We need information, we need skills, and more than anything else, we need relationships. And so we really mean it when we say, hey, walk away with new friends, walk away with new colleagues. So we're actually going to start by dropping into some small breakout groups just to meet some other people who are on this call, just to meet some other people who are working on pieces and struggling with things. And we want you to drop in, meet some folks, say hi, and we'll come back in about 3 or 4 minutes after you've had a chance to talk about what's bringing you to this conversation today. All right, welcome back, everybody. We hope you guys, there definitely was some overlap, even though people were coming from different countries, different contexts. And since we don't have time for kind of us to do a nice whip round and hear from, 100, 130 people all at the same time, I wanted to just show you a word cloud about what you all sent in. This is a word cloud of the comments that we got from folks when we said, hey, what's on your mind? And so this is kind of a lot of what's kind of sitting in the room with everybody today. Right? This is a bunch of what's sitting there. All right. And I do realize, as I was talking about other pieces, I forgot to introduce the coalition. So we are the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience for folks who don't know us. Hey, we are a network of museums, historic sites, places of memory around the world. Many of the lovely people on the call today are members of the coalition, right? We've got more than 300 members in, gosh, I think it's 67 countries now. We've got to update some of the apps. Right, we come together with the idea that our historic sites play critical roles in building more just and humane societies, and also that we're better at doing this work when we're connected to others. It's kind of what we're talking about today is a good chunk of, it's kind of the work that we often do with members as part of training and advising with them. And so I want to talk just a little bit today about, as we've been kind of diving into some of those words that we were already seeing, the pieces that we heard in the responses. Just want to say from the top that a lot of what we're talking about today are about power, right? That we're talking about people exerting power in spaces. And their own ability to shift power. That we're thinking about are about power, and they're also fundamentally about relationships. Right? So what's the relationship between staff that allows people to have particular kinds of responses? What's the relationship between frontline staff and administration? What's the relationship between visitors, with visitors and staff, between all the people who are present in a space? So kind of two concepts that we're going to follow down this thread through the next little bit about these two things, right? Power and relationships, right? And as we think about those, right, as people are exerting this around us right now, big narratives of power being put forward by politicians, small expressions of power by individuals in a space. As we think about the
Braden, you keep freezing. Sorry to interrupt everybody.
No,
I figured that was the quickest way.
Internet is usually all right, I'm back. It's better, Linda.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt everybody.
No, I appreciate it. This is why you have friends in the world, because they tell you when you're freezing online. So, right, we're talking about power. We're talking about the kind of power that we need to generate as organizations. And it needs to be three things, right? As organizations generate power to try and create better responses, to try and create spaces where people are able to learn from each other, where they're able to connect, where they're able to resist oppressive and harmful behavior. Our power needs to be collective, right? We're not putting any response or an power on a single individual, right? It needs to be planned. We can't do this haphazardly, and it's got to be institutional. There's no like, oh, those 3 people who deal with social media are going to figure this out. Oh, that one person who sells tickets is going to figure out. This has got to be top to bottom institutional thought about how we support individual staff members and how we push back on the harmful power that people are going to try and exert in our spaces. A couple other things that I just want you to think about holding in is simultaneously true in this work. And I think one of the challenges in the arts of our work is that we often hold things that seem contradictory in some way as simultaneously true at any given moment. Okay, so one is that making change, right? We see this across the world. Making change requires uncomfortable engagement and dialogue. We've got to go into uncomfortable spaces if we are going to hope to help people grow and make change, right? And simultaneously, not every situation is productive for engagement. And if your staff is being hurt, they should be able to disengage. Okay, right? So we've got to go into places that hurt us, and we also should be able to choose when and where we get hurt and we're uncomfortable. The other thing I want us to hold simultaneously is that we were talking about national and global structural power. And the actions and experiences of this are all happening at the human scale. So we're thinking both structurally and systematically and about people and the way that they're living their lives and experiencing each other, okay? Holding both of those simultaneously. And so what we would encourage you to do as you think about responses, because one piece of bad news that I have for you, if you were coming to hope that I had the magic words that I was going to be able to tell you, and you're like, say this thing, and that's going to be the thing that changes somebody's mind when they say something that's racist. Say this thing, and that's going to keep the person who's harassing and stalking your staff, that's going to keep them away. I don't have the magic words, because this isn't something that's about magic words. This is as often much more about process that we engage in that gives us sometimes particular moments. But this is about building processes that on the whole support people and support the interactions between them. So this is about making a plan, right? And this is about making a plan for what you do before something happens, during something when it's happening, and after. And just to call out that before and after as concepts are pretty interchangeable here, because we are always living after something has been said, and we are always living before the next thing has been said, right? Stuff's happened that's impacted your staff, and more stuff will happen in the future. So kind of, we're always in the before, always in the after. So let's make a plan and think about what to do. So we're gonna walk through a couple of these. There's lots we could talk about in any one of these moments, but we're just gonna try and call out like 2 or 3 things that we can do in each of these phases as we think about our planning, conversations to have, skills to bring as we walk through that, okay? So I want to start the before with thinking about the geography of an interaction, okay? A lot of times when people say, hey, we're having a hard time responding to this individual, right? We move into a place where we say, okay, how do I myself relate to this one other person? We find that's not, sometimes that's the social geography that we're living in, but often it isn't. And because the social geography is much more complex, it's part of what makes us freeze sometimes in those moments of saying, oh, what do I do? Because there's all these people and there's all these, right? It's not just a one-to-one interaction always, right? So a couple of other big features of the social geography to check out and to think about. And this is one kind of basic map that we create. Yours may vary based on what the social situation is. You could add lots of other circles, right? But kind of 4 major groups that we often think about as being part of any sort of social interaction like this, right? So there's somebody who's the speaker or the doer, right? The person, when you came and you were like, ah, that person who does this thing, I have a thing in my head, right? That's that person. right? So they are a big part of this. Sometimes there's a target, right? There's somebody who is being directly hurt. The comment has been made to somebody. It is targeted at somebody, right? So we want to think about who that person is in all of this. Right? There are often bystanders, right? And those bystanders might be getting ready to intervene. They might be passive. They might be walking by. They might be part of social groups. They might be, right? There's lots of reasons why there might be bystanders. And then finally, there's, right, you, the speaker, or not you, the speaker, sorry. You on the other side of this camera from me, right? The staff member. Right? And there's kind of some subgroups that then get connected with them, right? People who are connected with the target, people who are connected with the speaker or doer, right? Folks who have started to already try and intervene. If somebody pulls out a phone and starts videoing it, now we've got a digital audience. You might have an institutional audience that tells you, hey, I know when I go later, I'm going to have to tell my supervisor what happened here. And if I do or don't do certain things, I'm going to be supported or I'm going to be in trouble, right? Your colleagues might be there, right? And also recognize that these circles sometimes overlap, right? The person who said something or the person who's being targeted might be you, right? The person who said something might be your colleague, right? The person who's targeted might be your colleague, right? So there's a lot of ways that these circles could start to move around. But what's important is that we start to make plans and think about all of these different audiences and how we think about them interacting with each other. So there'll be times when I hear something, ideally we figure out a response that is able to thread an answer through all of these people. Everybody hears it, everybody grows, everybody changes, the harmful behavior is corrected. That would be amazing. Not always going to happen. Right? Sometimes we're going to have to start prioritizing one audience over the other. Right? Somebody says something, I see somebody being hurt. Hey, I'm going to prioritize protecting the person who's being targeted over trying to change somebody's mind. Right? Maybe I'm going to say, gosh, I don't know if I can change this person's mind, but I can model for the kind of behavior and ideas that I want them to take in the solution. Right? So we might start having to build priorities between these groups if we can't figure out something that connects them. All this to say, one of the things we encourage you to have as a conversation with your staff before this is to think about the different geographies and in different situations, right? If you're going into a board meeting and you know some of your staff is going to hear crummy things from your board, you got to talk about what your priorities are in that space. Right? If you know that you're going into a particular kind of program and you might expect something, what are your priorities in those spaces? And so this is going to be a geography that moves and changes from situation to situation. All right. So that's big idea number one for thinking about how we plan. The other conversation that we encourage you to have is about non-negotiables ahead of time, right? And so this is about telling people where our lines are in the world. Right? Where are the places that we're willing to stand and say, hey, yeah, let's talk about that? And where are the lines where we say, nope, as an institution, we don't take that on, right? We have as dialogue, right? We have a particular view here, and we're going to draw lines around that. So here's some examples from the Abbey Museum. Museum of the Wabanaki people in Bar Harbor, Maine, and thanks to them for letting us show their non-negotiables today, right? And you can take a look and see, right? It's not a million, it's not 50,000 things, but it is a couple of key things that helps them and their staff know this is where we stand, this is where the institution is going to support you. Looks different at different sites, right? Holocaust site, it might be about, we don't entertain Holocaust deniers here, right? Not a part of this. Okay. So it looks different at different places. But on a key conversation for you and your staff to have as you're thinking about doing planning. It's a good thing to also have an outside person sometimes help you work through so that people in the staff can just be having the conversation. And this is a long process. I saw Ford's Theater on the call. They've come up with a set of foundational truths. That took, David, what, 18 months, maybe 12 months. I don't remember how long, but it was a long time you all were thinking and writing and working on that. So a couple of conversations that we want to be having before you go in, just so we know where we stand. Where do we stand as an institution, and where do we stand in relation to the different groups that we're encountering? All right. Moving from the before, let's move into the during. This is the part that I think most people were coming for. What do we do during? Remember, no magic words, but a few that we might think about, right? And so often the way that we try and think about this, I'm actually going to do this in a different order than I planned. We're going to start here. I want to start with the idea of calling out versus calling in. And I learned a lot about this from writer Loretta Ross, Speaking Up Without Tearing Down. Encourage you to check out that article. It's a conversation that happens elsewhere, but I think that's a particularly good and accessible one for educators. We'll send you the link later on too. And Loretta talks about this idea of calling out versus calling in is rooted in the idea of that when we see somebody doing harm, are they seeking to do intentional harm, or are they unintentionally doing harm? And that makes a big difference in the way we start to plan our responses. So if somebody is doing intentional harm, that's when we think about calling out, right? That's when we think about trying to isolate somebody from a group in some way so that we can minimize and limit the harm that they're doing. We're going to try and model for them what they're doing, try and show them the harm, and try and meet them with more direct kind of moral critique to get them to try and change their mind, and also to rally other people who are in this space to oppose that kind of direct and intentional harm doing. Okay. There are a good chunk of the comments that you all sent in where I would say they are intentional attempts to do harm, and we want to live in that calling out world. And that's a place that we might use more of our advocacy skills than we're going to use our dialogue skills. Not necessarily, but we might lean more towards advocacy there. Calling in is when we think that somebody is not doing intentional harm, but we see them doing harm anyways, right? And that's where we say, hey, that's not a moment to push somebody away and try and minimize that harm. That's a moment to kind of call them into the social community that they're part of and really respond. We always want to respond with love, but here, really respond with love, with care, right? And with an intention of helping people grow, right? We say, hey, we know you want to be a part of this group. We know you're trying to do well by this group, but your impact is a negative one. So let's try and help you shift that behavior to one that's different, right? And this is much more about kind of inclusion. Dialogue is going to be a bigger part of this than advocacy is. So a couple of suggestions that from Loretta Ross's article for how to start a calling in conversation, right? You can see some statements, you can see some questions. Right? And questions are a really powerful way of helping us navigate some of these moments, right? They are things, they do a couple of different things for us, right? They help us, help people learn internally, because we can ask people to reflect on their own behavior, their own thinking, their own experiences. And we can ask them to start to think externally and learn externally, where they're going to be able to hear from other people who they may not have learned from before, they may not have heard from before, and get to expand their thinking in different ways. A couple of key questions that we often ask, just to sit this within the larger realm of dialogic questions, which if you haven't worked with us before, dialogic questions are questions that promote learning. We do that by having them be open-ended, and they can be answered from lived experience. Knowing that we're trying to keep this simple here, because I know for me, when I'm in a moment where something's happening, I can't remember 30 different things. I can't remember long, complicated response options. So I try and hold just a couple of key questions in my mind for when I am super stressed by what's going on around me. All right. So question number one is tell me more. I use that all the time anyways, but I use that in these moments often just to give myself space and time. Somebody says something and I'm like, whoa, I am not prepared. I don't know what to say right now. Tell me more. And I might not listen for the first 2 or 3 seconds because I am getting myself back on tilt. I'm trying to analyze the group. I'm trying to just give myself a little bit of space for that planning that we've done ahead of time to kick in and be able to start to make good choices here. So it's both a good learning opportunity and it's a way of creating space. Can't tell you how many times I've used that in tense moments to help myself breathe and be able to find space to respond. Okay. 2 other big ideas that we think about when we ask an individual to explain an idea is if we're stuck with somebody in the present, right? Somebody said something, we can go forward in time or we can go backward in time, right? One way or the other is going to help us understand a little bit more. So where does that come from for you? Let's go backwards. How do you understand this? Who taught you that? Where does that come from? What led you to believe that? What experiences you had that support that? All those kinds of questions that let us know somebody's backstory. The other option is to go forward and say like, okay, I hear you saying that, right? What do you think the impacts of that are, right? We're trying to get to somebody's intention with this, right? What do you hope the outcomes are from that? And it might help us see that, hey, while we disagree on, we find some challenges with mechanisms that you're thinking about, there actually can be some agreement on sort of impacts, or it helps us at least understand what somebody's hopes are. And the last is about that difference between internal and external learning, right? So shifting from one individual, you've said something, right? If you're part of a group, how do others see that? Super simple questions, but they help resolve and help grow and help move a million different challenging situations, right? I've used all of these a ton of times when people are starting to get tense with each other. They're starting to get unsure with each other. A couple of basic questions. And the same thing, how do others see that? You start to get to hear from somebody else, gives you a little bit of time to start to get back on your feet and think about what other things you might do to help the conversation move forward. Okay. All right, so that's our during, right? A couple of things that are during. Want to talk now about the after, okay? What are we doing after a moment happens? And I know I haven't answered all of your questions and giving you exactly the right words and do that. We're going to try and do a little bit of workshopping at the end of the hour here. So hang on, we're going to go back to that during in just a second. But I want to get there by going through some of this afterwards, okay? So afterwards, what are we doing? You got to debrief. This is part of being collective and this is part of being institutional. About this is that individuals don't bear this alone. We got to build cultures in our institutions that let people share the experiences, whether they are micro or major, about what just happened with the public. So we got to debrief, okay? If you've made promises, you got to keep your promises. If that is a promise to staff that says when people come and use this language, we don't let them come anymore, you got to keep that promise. Right? If you say that we hold people accountable for what they do, right? We are a space that is protective, and if another staff member is the one using damaging language, you got to keep your promises, right? And work with that staff member and try and make changes with that staff member, right? Part of being institutional about this is keeping the promises we make to staff, to community, to visitors, right? That we hold those promises not just when it's comfortable, but we hold those promises when it's uncomfortable. Right? So got to keep your promises. And then because afterwards is always before, we want to reflect and then we want to make changes to what our policies are and to what our plans are. and to what our training and our learning is, okay? So we want to consciously reflect on our processes, and we want to consciously reflect on experiences, and then we want to go and make changes, okay? Give you two ways that we want to make, two tools that we use to practice and to think about making changes, not so much at the policy level, but at the staff skills level. One of those is role play. We had a long conversation, just to be totally transparent. We had a long conversation among some of our staff about role play and when and how people are comfortable with it and not. So I encourage you to think about that as a group and come and talk to us, because we've got a lot more to say about that. But the place that we often start is actually with something called conversation mapping, which sort of lets us do the planning before we get to actually trying to work out the social situations through some role play. Right, and so conversation mapping is where we actually sit down with staff. We take a comment. In this case, this super messy handwriting is mine. This was with a member site someplace, and it was a plantation site, and they were getting the comment. They were a product of their time. Okay. And so we sat down and said, all right, if you get that comment, well, how could they have been against slavery? They were just a product of their time. It's not their fault, right? What do you say? Well, let's start drawing it out, right? What are the questions we could ask? What's the content you could share? What do we think they're actually saying by that? So trying to dive deeper into. And this probably took 30 or 45 minutes of conversation amongst the staff to think about and get to a couple of these different ideas and questions and pieces. This is also work we can be doing in an online space. Actually really nice. Thanks to my colleague Linda, who introduced me to Padlet. This is work we did. I saw Vera on the call earlier. Vera, I think you were part of this conversation with National Museum of the American Indian, thinking about, oh, nope, sorry, I didn't pull the one from you, Vera. I pulled the one that we just did with, no, this is, yes, about how we might respond to a couple of different questions in a space about kind of immigration, migration, and persistence in spaces there, right? So we were thinking about what are the different likely responses that students might give to questions, what are the additional questions we might ask, what are some of the different content we might share. So it's a way of kind of starting to sit down, to breathe, to let ourselves plan, because the conversation never goes this way, but that kind of planning helps us be better prepared in the moment. All right. So we're going to stop the sharing there for just a moment. All right. I know that there is a ton of stuff that you all are thinking through, and those are a couple of small ideas to help you get started with this, okay? What we want to do, kind of based on these big ideas, right? We're thinking about power and relationships. We're thinking about what are the geographies of the social interaction? What are our non-negotiables? Are we in a calling in or calling out situation? And how are we planning with staff? What are the responses that we have? We're going to drop back into our small groups. And I want you to we're going to spend about 10 minutes in those small groups. I want you to actually workshop some of your challenges. Okay, this is a chance to sit down with some other colleagues and say, hey, what are we saying and how might we actually think about some response? All right, so I think we've got a few moments here, right? Knowing we can spend hours talking about nuances, working on details. It's part of what we love working with sites and staff and members on, and it takes a bunch of time, but hopefully this gives you some starting points. In the last couple minutes, there any burning questions that folks have that they kind of want to bring forward to this group, particular challenges or questions that you want to bring up now? Feel free to use the chat box to do that.
Hey, Braden and everybody. I also just put our evaluation survey in the chat box, which we'd love if you would complete after we finish, because it's super helpful to us, both in thinking about this webinar and planning future webinars. So please do that.
I also see people saying, hey, I want that email address of the person I was just talking to. If you can coordinate it in the chat box right now, do that. If you can't, reach out and we will put you in touch with folks if everybody's okay with that, because we want to do that. Yeah, I see some questions about doing this on social media. And I think it's good to think there about differences between digital programming, where we are doing live digital programming like this, and social media. Sometimes those things get all lumped together and our options are very different in each of those spaces. So just kind of sorting those two pieces out. I was just with Jennifer from Peer 21, who's on their social media team, right? So there are folks on this call who think about that every day. And so if that is a particular concern, as I'm seeing a lot of people being like, yeah, maybe we need to do another conversation on specifically social media, which is great because we want to talk about what you want to hear about. So yeah, that's a conversation. All right. Other stuff that's coming in, and Linda and Camilla, if you can read faster than I can to pull out a comment, please do. But okay. I think since we are running to the end of our time here, and there is a lot of, clearly we are just at the surface, but that's okay, because we're all in this for kind of long-term change work. And so we hope that today you have picked up a few new pieces about where to start. You've picked up a few new people to start with. Come back. Linda's got an upcoming webinar specifically. Linda, do you want to briefly summarize it? Since we're talking about this from a range of angles.
Sure. We are next week on a day I don't remember. Wednesday
Thursday.
or Thursday. Thanks, Camilla. Going to be talking about kind of self-care for your frontline workers, particularly in these times. But more broadly, actually, we started thinking about self-care, but it's actually more about thinking about collective care for all of us who are doing frontline work in this time. And I'll be moderating actually a really informal conversation with two of our members, one from the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle and another from the Church in the Attic in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Two very different organizations. But I think it will be a really interesting conversation because they both take really interesting approaches, both before the pandemic and now as they think about reopening and how to do that. And then I think that we've also got a webinar later in September.
Yeah, we're gonna
one of the webinar shorts is about dealing with difficult people.
Yeah, we're gonna
really concrete, weird. What's it called? It's based on a book. It's like From Bulldozers to Clams, How to Deal with Difficult People. It's actually super useful. So put all those on your calendar.
We wanted to stick that in with today's content, but couldn't figure it out. We're also talking with folks. We got folks from Abbey Museum and from the Shingwak Residential School Center at Algoma University. Who are going to come on and talk about how they use education to try and challenge the myths and blind spots that they encounter regularly around issues of colonialism and First Nations people in North America.
Hey, Braden, I wanted to call out Georgia's question particularly, and I don't think there's a great answer, but I thought it was a really great one for us to hold with us as we end, which is not everybody sees and absorbs harm in the same way. How can a staff team navigate those differences, particularly when those in power are predominantly white and won't absorb harm in the same way? So I don't expect you to have an answer, Braden, but I just thought that, thanks, George. I just thought that was a really important, thought for us to think about as we wrap up.
Right. And that's back to the idea, I think, of that we don't exist. We often want to kind of atomize these experiences, and we say, oh, there's this one moment that a visitor came and said something, but it is not sort of atomized or separate from the larger social context that we're living in, the cultural context that we're living in, and those larger structural power contexts that we're living in. And so I would hope that as we talk about trying to do this work collectively and institutionally and in planned ways, what that means is, right, thinking about not just, okay, how do we handle this one experience with a visitor, but how are we trying to build an institution as a whole that answers the multiple challenges that are in George's question in different ways, from HR and hiring to as well as frontline staff support and education, right? And kind of the institutional work that's happening there. So yeah, a really good question, and one that like opens up all the more roads and kind of food for thought for us, and is a really provocative one to land and end on. So I think we're going to leave it there today, but that's just a pause, not a full stop. We hope you all are in touch with each other and with us many times going forward. Email, call, get on social media with us. We want to talk with you in any way that is helpful. Join these future upcoming webinars, and we will see you all soon. Thanks for hanging out and sharing all you know today.